more we focus on the skills and if the person is right for the role, I think the less emphasis on gender, we can create more opportunities for women by leading by example. And so we need to stand up for each other, but we also need to just stand up for the right person for the right role.
Well, and I think for me personally, when I first came in, I mentioned it a little bit, I never really thought about my gender as an issue in terms of who I was in my work and what I did until I moved into a leadership position in a certain place. Because like you, I've also had some wonderful mentors, both male and female, kind of helping me and moving me along and sometimes identifying that like, yes, you know, you can do that. So I really thought of education as egalitarian in terms of as a profession for women. So it was a little bit surprising when I started to see some of the challenges that I began to identify a few years ago. Do you have like a moment or an instant where that sort of that clarity of that like, okay, there's something here that I didn't notice before? I mean, Belinda, you already spoke to it a little bit, but for those of us who maybe like came into leadership a little bit older and had a lot of time in that classroom where it is a little bit more egalitarian, do you have a moment or a time that you remember thinking, this is new for me?
I had a moment at my first international job fair. At the time, I had already done some work as an administrator in a high school when I wanted to become an international administrator. So those were the jobs I was seeking. And at the job fair, someone was kind enough, a man was kind enough to pull me aside to say, I've looked over your CV and all of your recommendations. You look like you would be a great candidate. I'm sorry to have to tell you this is still part of a good old boys network. So it hurt. It was, it deflated me, but I also appreciated that I wasn't wondering, is something wrong with me? Personally, as far as my expertise, the work I have done in the past, is that's what's blocking this opportunity, but he was honest and open enough to tell me. And right now, I find myself doing the best I can do at my current role, knowing and speaking, planting seeds that I eventually want to become an international administrator.
I have led a fairly charmed career path. I have to say I've worked with wonderful people. I've worked with both male and female, and they have been very generous of their time and their expertise, and I don't have that moment. And potentially also because I came into international education very young. I only did 2 years before moving overseas, and so most of my career has been international.
I mean, I suppose looking back, I would say that the biggest critics, apart from myself, often was, I hate to say, other women. And when I was in the class and loved being in the class working with the students and felt I could make a bigger difference as a principal, and first time I applied for the post, my colleagues at school, female colleagues, really couldn't believe that I was stepping forward because I was just going to have a family and these jobs were for the men because they were going to have to support a family, and that was the mindset then. So I would say that in my early career as a senior leader, it was the other females who would be highly critical. If I went and stood up or sat in a panel, presented, people would comment on what you were wearing, how you looked. They weren't talking about the man's suit or his tie or the kinds of shoes he was wearing. And I suppose what I found, I had to be prepared to take criticism and not really care too much. And I think maybe that's, again, a bit of a difference between our male counterparts, that females tend to care too much about, do people like me? Or if I'm wearing this, will people criticize what I'm wearing? And we worry too much. And I suppose that's, looking back, it was having the resilience and the self-belief to say, I want to make a difference and have a passion and a purpose for what I want to achieve, and I'm just going to have to get over these insecurities of how I look, how I sound, and what my other female colleagues are thinking about me stepping forward. So, I'm glad now, looking back, that I did have that confidence to step forward and say, I don't care that much what people think. I care more about the difference I can make in this senior role.
So I was just reading an interview with Benna Kalick, who is part of Habits of Mind and Art Costa and a lot of that work coming out of the United States. She's about 80 years old, and they were, I think, they're doing a profiles in women's leadership. And one of the things that she was talking about was the importance of carving out time and space for mentorship. That once you are in leadership roles, that you really have to you need to take a step forward and look at how are you going to support other people, whether they're men or women, in terms of becoming leaders. In our busy jobs and everything that you have on your plate, like, how do you find time to mentor? What does mentorship look like to you? And what are the kinds of qualities that you're looking for in people that you would choose to mentor and promote and encourage into leadership?
It is really tough to carve out the time, but I think for me personally, when I'm looking for potential leaders or people to step up, I generally try to look for the quieter ones. Most times the people who are loud, or what I consider loud or perhaps out there already, they already have a large following. They have a group of mentors already. And so I'm sort of going down to the next level and looking who's really doing their job well, who's quietly going about making those connections, because often they're more intuitive. What I've found is they're more intuitive and receptive to perhaps sharing their journey. And as a quieter person myself, that's how I was recognized. So I feel like I have to bring that on and pass that forward in my own way, yeah.
So when you step into the role of leadership, it's all about developing others. It's not about yourself anymore. It is really about servant leadership. And so building that leadership capacity in everybody, not just the people you choose to mentor. And that starts with listening. It starts with knowing where they are at on their learning journey and knowing what's important to them. And it's about helping them discover within themselves. And not in a, that's really been my leadership journey and really a big learning for me, and I think a lot of it came with the adaptive schools, is it's not about, nobody wants to be told what to do. Your 5-year-old doesn't want to be told what to do. People are interested when you're interested in them. Everybody has their own story, everybody has their own journey, and our role as leaders is to identify that, help people find their own voice, and help give opportunity and direction.
Yeah, I mean, I would support that view, and I think it's about creating a real culture of empowerment. And if colleagues feel that they are empowered, then people will step forward at different times and take the leadership role. I'm reflecting on the position I have now. I have a senior management team that I work very closely with, both male and females on that team. And they're all very different, and therefore the relationship and the interaction I have is different with each of them. But it is about having the relationship, that open relationship that you can share and they can share, which is much more important, how they're feeling. I mean, what I've found is rather than have formal professional reflection development, sitting down talking about targets, is about encouraging them to seek feedback. So we now, when we work together, they will say to me, how do you think that went? Or do you think I could have done this better? And then you're in a completely different mind space to come in. It's now time to sit down and look at your targets and let me tell you what I think about your performance. So over the time, we've I suppose, developed a relationship of working quite closely together. And the joke really with our team is, I love to run. I'm a runner. I love getting out there running. And they've all taken up running, which is just great. So when we start our meetings, we start with, so how far have you been running and how fast have you been running? And then they say, what do you think about whatever it is we're working on? Do you think I could be doing this differently? So just having that different relationship, but one that you can be quite open, where people trust you to say exactly what you're thinking, has really, I think, enabled us to make some really positive steps forward.
To piggyback on Belinda's comment about running, that's not my thing, but but I appreciate that you're also sharing with them what you do to stay healthy, and you're being transparent, you're being human. And I think sometimes that could be a challenge when you look for a mentor. You put them on this pedestal and you think that they're not approachable, or somebody might think you're not approachable. So the more they can see you as a human being and somebody they can relate to, that helps with the mentoring relationship and providing those opportunities to be transparent. Let's say they do a presentation, they ask for your advice. You might share something that happened in your past that helped you get over a hurdle or helped you become a better presenter. So that's my take on it.
So I don't know about your schools, but at my school, I would say we have, I mean, on our admin team, it's a pretty even balance of men to women, but we tend to default in traditional positions of leadership. Like the leadership comes from the elementary school principal and the curriculum people, whereas, you know, the secondary principals are male, the head of school is male, the chief financial officer is male. We do tend to, even though you'll find, like statistically, really high number of women as principals in elementary schools, those statistics really dramatically flip when you start looking at secondary schools. So there's a barrier there. And there is kind of a traditional path to female leadership, to the extent that I remember a few years ago at an Ear Coast conference, there was a women's leadership lunch, and curriculum people weren't a part of it. It was just for people who were leading schools, because we weren't seen in our roles as being the same kind of leader. So what's that barrier there, in your opinion? Is there anything that can be done to address it and support it, and encouraging women to go into areas of leadership where they are traditionally less seen in education?
Well, I suppose, you know, I'm female and I'm the CEO, and my chief finance officer for ESF is female as well. But I would say we have 7 secondary schools and only 1 female principal of the secondary school. We've recently recruited quite a number of principals to our schools. We have 22 in Hong Kong. And I would say that we have very few women stepping forward for these roles. And I think a point that was made, that we are actively looking to try and get that gender balance, but it's maybe stepping forward, and perhaps secondary schools have been more male dominated, and it is scary to stand up as a female and say, you know, I'm going to lead the alpha males, if that's how you see a staff. I mean, there's lots of examples of very effective female principals of secondary schools, and I would be encouraging colleagues who work in the secondary sector to step forward for these roles.
So one of the things that I think was said earlier was the fact that women tend to not apply to things until they're overqualified, and men apply if they tick 2 or 3 things off of the long list. And one of the things that I truly believe, it's a numbers game. I'm a mathematician at heart, and if there is a job out there in leadership for everybody, and it's about putting your name out there, and it's about applying, and it's about taking on those opportunities. And so, you know, if you apply to 100 jobs, you're going to get 1 of them. So it's about doing the math, and it's about doing the work of, you know, knowing who you are as a leader. I think it's important. Making sure that you have those connections, having somebody look at your CV, having somebody look at your cover letter. You know, I see as somebody who's hired a lot of people, I can tell you that certain things turn me off immediately. If I am seeing all kinds of wild fonts, I want to know what you've done. I'm interested in an action-oriented CV. What have you done, and where have you been? And you know, and so it's not about, you know. And the other mistake I think people make sometimes, especially, you know, when you put your picture on the CV, make sure it's a professional picture. It's not a picture of you at the beach. It's not a picture of you, you know, and it's a picture of you in a role you want. You know, you're applying for the job you want to have, and so you have to present yourself that way.
And to go along with that, Dana was just mentioning in her session that they have a WLead Facebook page where they list job openings. And so if you know someone who would be a good fit, you're channeling them that way. You're looking at their CV, you're looking at their cover letter, and you're making sure they know about the opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, with the school in the recruiting season right now, and we have some key positions that we were recruiting for, the committees are wanting to see females recruited into those roles. There is just a lack of females applying with the specific skill set that perhaps the school wants at the time. So again, there is an urge out there to put your name out there, to put yourself out there, because schools are looking for them. They really are, and they want to apply the right person for the right job. And it takes a female, to step up and to put your name out there.
Do you think sometimes that we look too much at resumes and it's like, okay, we've got a list that we're trying to check all the boxes, and they don't check all the boxes, and so we don't see them for what they can offer? I see that with curriculum people. In particular, they're doing big PK-12 jobs, but yet somebody might think they couldn't run a middle school or a high school when they've actually had this really big experience, in a school. Do you think sometimes when we're looking at who might move into these jobs, are we too narrow, and that you've got to have a bunch of stuff on the list?
Yeah, I think that whole shift has to change. I had a comment said to me just the other day, actually, because I'm moving into a new role in August, and this role is to help several schools develop. And the person said to me, "Oh, but then you couldn't go any further with that until you've been ahead of school." And I'm like, well, why can't I go any further with that? And so that whole shift around, well, it doesn't mean I have to follow the step ladder to get to where you think I need to go in order to move to the next position. It's where my skills align with whatever I'm going for is the most important part. So there's still that piece there, but we all are responsible for making that shift change.
So the first thing anybody sees when they're looking at you as an applicant is your cover letter, and it's your opportunity to tell your story. And I am often disappointed at the lack of information in a cover letter about who this person is as a leader, and how well they know the school. And often you can tell that, sometimes they accidentally have a different name of a school halfway down because they've sent out a bunch. Take your time to really understand what you're applying for and how what you're going to bring to that school. You have to sell yourself. That's the foot in the door.
Yeah, I would agree. You have to look at what's the skill set that the school is looking for, and you have to match that. And really don't make the recruiters work too hard to find out if you are the right person, because they're not going to do that. Other people will have taken the time to make sure that they've looked at the skill set and they've matched that with the experience. So yeah, take your time, make sure the application is right. And I think to the point that's been made, only apply for the jobs that you really want. Don't put yourself forward for something that you find yourself in the situation where you're about to be offered the job and you think, do I really want that job? Because that can sometimes work against you in the longer term too. So be careful about what you apply for, but do have the confidence to step forward. We all have to be given the chance. So when I became an HMI from being a principal, I had never been an HMI before, so I had some skills, but I didn't have the full skill set. When I became the CEO of ESF, I hadn't worked in Hong Kong. There were aspects of the job that I was going to have to learn. But play up the skill set that you do have and be open and show that you're able to learn in the other areas. But you do need to have that confidence to say, I don't know if I'm going to be that good in this job, but I'm going to give it everything I have to do so. Because I think part of the issue is unless you've done it, unless you feel that you can do it, you hold yourself back. Everybody has to have the courage to step forward and be promoted into a job that they haven't done before.
There are all kinds of things you can do in the classroom that show leadership. You're a leader in that room to whoever you're teaching. And those skills translate to adults. They absolutely translate to adults. So that's what I say when I mean about telling your story. Talk about the times that you've transitioned people, that you've changed people, that you've identified a problem and how you solved it. That it doesn't have to be in a formal role. One of the things that I was very fortunate in my career path of taking on a lot of leadership roles that were name only, they weren't paid. I was a team leader at ASIJ. It wasn't a paid role. It was something I took on. But when I went to apply for that formal role of leadership, I had those experiences that I could speak to. And so in your schools right now and in your jobs right now, seek out leadership opportunities. Those are all resume building things, and they're experience building things, and that gives you the confidence to then speak to those, because once you've done the CV and once you've done the application, you got to get through the interview process. And the interview process really is about knowing who you are as a leader, knowing the school deeply and well, and being able to talk to because it's always about the fit. It's always about, are you the right person for this school, for this time? Because schools are living and breathing things, and they change too.
And even if they don't have a team leader role, look at their vision statement, look at their mission statement, look at your own gifts, and look to see how you can enhance what the school is doing already, and that will get you noticed. You're not doing it necessarily for the toot or the beep on the horn, from those that you work with, but you are building your capacity that will be used later on.
And you all have really big jobs, and you juggle a lot. How do you achieve some life-work balance? Do you achieve life-work balance? Where are you successful? Where do you struggle?
Well, the honest answer is I struggle. I tell everyone else what they should be doing to get the life-work balance, and then I don't do that myself. We have started the new year, my senior team and I have started the new year by saying, okay, we're going to have a leadership day at least once a term, and that leadership day is your day to really step back and think strategically about the journey that we're on. We have a 5-year strategic plan, and we're right bang in the middle of that. And really the challenge is the busyness of the job. I could work 6 in the morning till 10 at night every day of the week and still not get to the bottom of my entry. And part of being a leader is recognizing that and saying, I can only do what I can in the time that's available. So I'm not that successful at taking enough time, but I recognize the importance of that. And as the leader, if you don't do it, other people won't either. So you really have to set that example. I know there's a big difference after a holiday. I'm sure you do too. If I have any burning question that I want to discuss with the principals, I never do at the end of term. I never go into the school the last week before a big holiday and raise something that's likely to be contentious. I wait till after the summer break, because you know what? Everybody's laid back, chilled back. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, of course we can do that. We can find the solution to that. So we see the difference that taking a break and being refreshed has on people's mindset. And it's really the challenge that I'm now on that crusade. How do we ensure that our schools, that our leaders are taking time so that they don't have that sense of being overwhelmed by the job?
When you step into leadership, and this is true when I was teaching in the classroom, I'm going to be really honest, your job's never done. There's always something to do. And so it is really, really important that you have a balance, because you're modeling every day. And if you're overtired or are not able to be your best self, people notice that. And that's what you're bringing to the job. And so the balance is really important. And one of the reasons I'm an international educator, and while I came to it very young, is I think that in international education, we do it right. We work and then we take a break, and then we work and we take a break. And I really, really focus on those breaks, and I don't work during the break times. There's always a few exceptions, especially if you're doing late hires, but I really try to refresh. And and then the other thing that I would say is that I'm a firm believer in working smart, not long. Really knowing what your outcomes are and what you're trying to accomplish, and making sure that you're building capacity amongst the team, so you're not the only one pulling the wagon.
One of the reasons I am international is because I could not achieve work-life balance in the States. And it was 24/7. I was a perfectionist, and I do enjoy the international life that you do have breaks, and you work hard, but you play hard. And building capacity, if I said one of the things that I've learned as being an administrator, is I need to do a better job of building capacity in others so that I could have a work-life balance.
Yeah, it's a struggle every day. I'm a mum, a single mum of 2 young boys, and also a student, again, at university. So I'm constantly battling the emotional struggle of, am I there enough for my boys? Am I giving enough to my work? Am I giving enough to myself? But for me, exercise and healthy living is vital, absolutely vital, and my keystone to be able to function every day. And so I have to figure out where I can fit that in, because that's where I can release my energy, where I can get energy back. And so you have to figure out what's your trigger point. For me, it's that. And I just, you have to navigate every day, day by day. And like they were saying, take the breaks when you can, and definitely build capacity, because you can't carry it on your own. As a mom, you can't carry it on your own, and as a colleague, you can't either, and definitely as a leader. So you have to learn to figure out where you're going to pass on and what you're going to take on yourself.
And I don't wonder, as when we were talking about earlier, that a lot of times women don't, raise their hand for something until they're 80-90% confident that they can do that. How does that translate in being able to actually step back and let other people do it? Or do you end up taking on a whole lot extra because of that mentality that we tend to have about I'm not raising my hand because I'm halfway there, I'm 100% there? And how does that translate and impact sometimes the day-to-day once we're in these roles and the jobs that we do? That's more of a comment. You don't have to answer to that one, but just a wondering, amusing. Really, my last question is, before I turn it over to the audience to ask some questions, it's 4 wonderful, capable women on the Women's Leadership Panel. What's the role of men in ensuring that women have equal access, equal opportunity? Should we have had a man up here on the panel today? What's your thinking and your thoughts on that?
Do you want to answer, Tosca? My initial thought is to that is, as a mom of boys, that's where I'm starting. And so I have conversations. They're only 7 and 3, but I talk about, my role as raising them and their role as being my son and potential, adults as well. And so for me, that's where it starts. But yeah, I do, when I have an issue I need to go and talk about with someone, sometimes, for me, I will take it to an emotional level, and I need to get that balance back. So I will seek out males and I will seek out females to get a balanced point of view, because males have a lot to share around being able to say what they think and not worrying too much about it. And women have a good point of view to say when it is you need to add something to that to make it sound a bit more nicer. So I do seek out both, and I think there's a definite role for men, and it would be great to have a man up here and hear their point of view.
I believe they need to be part of the conversation so it does not continue to be status quo. So we need to look for opportunities to include them. It does start with your inner circle at home, building the next generation up. But it also starts with your colleagues when you're talking at work. In the last session, we kind of mentioned, what do you do when you hear a comment that, a joke, or you mentioned you didn't become part of the jokes? How do you address it so you're not thought of as being the witch, but you're asserting yourself and you're letting them know that it's not okay to say this, but you're giving them the opportunity to grow going forward too. So without them being part of it, it won't change.
So, I'm going to just look at the statistics, and there are more men in leadership positions, and there are way more male directors in all of these international schools than female directors, and so they have a big role. And their role is a colleague and hopefully a supporter. And I have been, like I said, I've been very fortunate in my life. I went from Tim Miles to Dr. Chip Barter, who gave me my first principal role and continues to be a really a strong mentor in my life, and somebody who I seek when I need advice, and then also just those natural opportunities. There is a person who is doing an interim right now in Delhi, Karen Dunmeyer. I replaced her in Warsaw. She was still in the region. She went to Madrid. She was the most generous person. I walked into a school. She'd been there 12 years. She was beloved. And she really ensured my success that first year. She was extremely generous, and I think both men and females in roles of leadership need to model that and model that generosity, because there's plenty of leadership to go around. It is not anything to hoard.
Yeah, I mean, I think the men's role is critical, and I think, yeah, we should have a man. In fact, we should have half the panel should be male, and it's great to look out into the audience and see so many men are in the audience, because actually we know we will have made progress when we're just talking about leadership and we're not having to focus in on women. That this should just be a leadership panel talking about leadership in education, and therefore I think we need both men and women to be part of working together to ensure that that's the focus. The focus is leadership in our schools, and it's not gender.
Right, and on that note, I'm going to turn it over to the audience. If you have any questions, I'll run over and bring you the mic, and you can ask any of our panelists a question.
Well, as a student, how evident do you think is the female-male gap in school life? Because you're all teachers.
Okay, so, at the student level, there's less of a gap. I don't think that our kids in today, especially those kids who've had really fortunate upbringings and been in, they've been in schools that are international, often with 40 to 60 different nationalities at a school, and they don't have the gender norms, I think, that the rest of us who are, over 40 grew up with. And so that's very liberating. And I think that plays itself out a lot on social media, and it certainly plays itself out on leadership roles in the school. There are the traditional roles of whether it's student council, but I've seen more and more, especially at secondary level, where it's more initiated by the project and kids following their passion versus formal roles of leadership, and recognizing that every single person can make a difference, and to do something in small amounts can really add up, and that's something certainly as adults we can learn from our student population.
Great question, and I think in terms of leadership, we've certainly been reviewing across our schools if there is a gap, and what we discover is there's no gap in terms of males and females. Where we do see a massive gap, of course, is in the areas, the subjects that students want to study. So if we look at the STEM subjects, we still find that there are more boys studying STEM subjects, and when we look at the universities and the subjects that our students go on to study, we find that still the science and the maths and the engineering are still lacking any interest from females. So that's something that we are looking at.
I've kind of got two. The first one's kind of stupid, but what's an HMI?
What's a what?
What's an HMI?
Oh, what's an HMI? Sorry, there. An HMI, that's Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Education. So in the UK, they have a special team of principals who become Her Majesty's Inspectors of Education, and they go into schools and they evaluate the quality of education. Now, I have to say that when I became an HMI, I loved the job, but I had no friends. Nobody liked the HMI, so when I had no friends, I decided to leave that job and become a director.
So you guys mentioned sometimes you would be considered for jobs to balance the gender stuff. Would you ever consider turning down a job if you thought you were being selected just because you were a girl?
So I believe that it's always about the fit. It's always about who you're going to work with and for. And, as an international educator, I've never chosen a job based on location. I often am taking, you're applying for multiple jobs at the same time often. And I have always made that decision based on the people. And, and that's who I am as a leader. I really believe in relationship and relationship building. And at the heart of all relationships is trust. And if you already like somebody, or it's that moment that I was, as an intern, at 20 years old, those were not my people. It's finding your people. It's finding like-minded people, because people together make a big difference. And so you want to make sure that the fit is there, because the job's hard.
Oh, I'm just going to bounce over here and I'll come right back.
Hi, I just took on a leadership role. It's a fairly new school. It's like a 4-year-old school. And so one of the things I wanted to get advice on is, what do you do about those team members that no matter what you do, they have a negative mindset? You leave the meeting and it's like, they call it preemptive measures is what she's referring it to, but they just drain your team out. You give all these positive feedbacks, all these good things, and they just always find a problem in every area. What do you do with those individuals?
When I experienced those individuals in the past, I realized that some people might be slow to get on board, and I continue to, you state your message. If the goal is for the best interest of the children, who can argue that? And that's how you go forward with whatever you're trying to initiate. This is for the best interest of the children. How can I support you in doing this? And if they're still dragging their feet, it's always, how can I support you in doing this? Because this initiative is not going away.
I've got lots of experience of working with the people that you're describing, and I would say that over time what I've learned is listen and look at why they're saying what they are saying. Often people come with positive intent and they might just handle it in a way that's less than helpful, but there's something there that can help the school move forward positively. But I think it's about being very clear about what the goals are, what you're aiming to work on together. And I think you have to have the courage to have the courageous conversations and actually to call the behaviours. So if someone is continuously undermining or trying to trip you up, it's being quite clear and calling that behaviour. Certainly my experience would tell me that the biggest regret most leaders have is that they don't tackle poor behaviour or underperformance quickly enough. So I wouldn't leave that. So if you're aware that there's someone who is, deliberately undermining or trying to trip you up, I would call it and I would do it tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. Next question.
I'm just wondering what you think, or whether you think there is a link, coming back to we were talking about earlier, recruitment, and the lack of women putting themselves forward sometimes for jobs if they only believe they can sort of 50% they can do and the other 50% they haven't done before. I'm wondering if you agree that there's a little bit more to that, in that perhaps women tend to be judged more often on their past experience, and perhaps we're all guilty of judging men more potential to do a job and their potential to do something that they haven't done before. And even when we as women are making those decisions, does that skew the argument a little bit?
I think we're all products of our environment, and I do think that in certain situations and in certain, there's stereotypes for a reason, because there's some truth to those stereotypes. And so recognizing them and being aware of it. But again, to me, it is always about, I don't think the bar is any higher for a woman than it is for a man. I think it really is about finding the right fit and finding the job that speaks to you. And the job, everybody, if you go for an interview and you clearly want to be at that school and you show that's flattering to the school. They're not interested in hiring somebody that doesn't want to work there. They're interested in hiring somebody that does. And so, yes, I do think that some of that still exists, and less so, and certainly less so internationally than probably in the States or in Australia or in in some of our national systems. But I think that you have to put your name out there, and you have to know the job. You have to know, you have to do your homework. One of the best things about living in our day and age is everything's online. You can Google the school, and you can go to the best place. Every kid at every school there are several of them that have YouTube pages. You want to know what the school's like? You look at those pages, because schools have an identity and a personality, and that comes from the adults in the building, and it comes out through the students.
I mean, I would agree with you. I think perhaps women worry more about what their past experience is and do they have the skill set, and perhaps we should be more like our male colleagues and look to the future and say, this is my past experience, but this is what I can offer. And I think if you have the passion and you see the purpose and you see the right fit, then you talk yourself into that job.
I teach some awesome students who need good role models. So my question is, who would you consider good leadership in your past or present that made you good leaders?
Well, I'm an American, so please do not look at our political system. I think we're in a day and age, especially with the internet and commentary pretending it's news, that it's really, really important to have a voice and to, call that out, especially to our students, to say and acknowledge when behavior is bad. And my concern is we're moving the bar, and the new normal is not a normal I'm at all attracted to, nor do I think it's healthy, nor do I think it's good for our kids.
As far as the mentor question, what has helped me along my journey is Carol Goodman, who is my shero. I've kept in contact with her along my journey, and I ask her questions when I wanted her advice. Having somebody as your mentor that you can still connect to and you look up to them and you appreciate what they have to offer you is important. So for the students you work with, find the mentor within the building. If they can find somebody within the building to pour into their lives, that would be helpful for them.
Yeah, I think being able to go to somebody, whether it's online or face-to-face, is really important to have those conversations. In saying that, right now, one of my mentors is the current new Prime Minister of New Zealand, which is where I'm from, who's also a female, only 37 years old, and just announced that she was pregnant yesterday. So watching that story unravel is really interesting. And having been through that story myself, where it was turned into a negative that I was pregnant by other people's eyes, seeing her rise above that and how she's handling and navigating those comments is a real history in the making, I think, for women to look to, and men, to see how it's going to happen.
Belinda, do you want to speak to that?
I mean, I think that's a great question, and I think for me, it's about values. And if I look back to my parents, I think I was very fortunate to be brought up with really a great set of values that have stayed with me. And I've tended to gravitate towards people with similar values. So the people I work with in Hong Kong and that I do turn to, and many of them are people who work in my schools or work in my senior team, where I might turn and ask for some advice. It's people that I know have really good values. And as a teacher in the classroom working with students, there's nothing greater that you can give than the values and the person that you are to them.
All right, any last questions? Yes.
My question is, do you think Asian women is even harder to be a leader in the international schools? And how do you think about that?
My chief finance officer is from Hong Kong, and I suppose she has shown, she's the mother of 3 children, and she was educated in Hong Kong, although she spent some time in the UK. And she, I suppose, is a great example of being in a very senior post, and does a brilliant job. Again, I would say that I've had very few Asian women step forward for senior roles in any of the positions that we've advertised in ESF. I don't think I'm in a strong position to say what the reason behind that would be, if it's any different to other women not stepping forward. If I do look at the students in the schools, however, I see young people coming through our schools who have great leadership capacity. Our whole mission is about nurturing global citizens and leaders of the future. And I would have high hopes and certainly encourage young Asian girls who are coming through ESF to be the global leaders of the future.
You know, one of the things about Asian international schools is they tend to be on the forefront often of new ideas, and you know, you have both the schools that are, there's so many startups right now in China that are being very, very innovative in the products that they're delivering. And, you know, you also have very traditional schools in Asia that have been around for, you know, I worked in Tokyo at ASIJ, and that was from 1997 to 2002, and it celebrated 90 years during that time. So it's well over 100 now. It's, you know, I think sometimes those schools tend to rest on their reputation and aren't as innovative as some of the new schools that are starting up. And there are lots of opportunities for leadership throughout Asia because there are so many new schools.
I personally haven't seen that in international schools, but what I've noticed in Asia, living in Shenzhen, China, is the rise of Asian businesswomen and how much they are putting themselves out there now. We have families in our school where the woman is a CEO or she is the founder of a company. And that's been great to watch, the shift in that and how they've navigated a traditional Asian history where the man is, you know, predominantly the force in the business world, where women are rising up now. But I'm seeing that more in the business market and less in the education sector. So I don't know what that means. It's just an observation, yeah. But it's definitely something to look into and look at how these businesswomen are navigating their way in the business world.
All right, well, ladies, I'd like to thank you. Our time is at an end, and I'd really like to thank the audience as well for coming and participating in this conversation. Let's give them a round of applause. And if you'd like to join us in this conversation and connect with some of the people who have been sharing ideas and resources through WLead, we are hashtag WLead. There's a Facebook page. Dana curates a fantastic Flipboard site where you can find all kinds of reading and things like that related to women and leadership, just in education and outside of education as well. So thank you for coming and participating in this conversation today, and have a great conference. We appreciate that you chose us. There are a lot of great choices for you to choose today. So thank you very much.